today, you and I are getting a look, maybe a real look, into a world that gets a lot of hype, on TV and stuff, but maybe we don't often see the actual, the nuts and bolts of it.
Yeah, exactly. We're digging into Anthony Bourdain's Kitchen Confidential today, specifically some key excerpts. The idea is to pull out the surprising stuff, the tough lessons learned from someone who literally did everything: dishwasher, cook, chef.
And he's pretty clear up front, isn't he? He says something like, he's not trying to make anyone mad or gross people out.
Right. He just wants to show it like he saw it. The
Yeah.
good, the bad, the ugly. So it's all in there. He says it's the life he knew.
So let's get into that life. His awakening, his culinary start. It wasn't in some fancy kitchen, was it?
No, not at all. It was actually on a family trip to France when he was a kid. He talks about this cold soup, peachy sauce, on a boat.
Just a cold soup.
Yeah. Sounds simple, but yeah, he writes that it woke something up.
Yeah.
Made him aware of taste, like it flipped a switch.
Huh. And it wasn't just the soup, right? That whole trip sounds pretty formative.
Oh, totally. It was a culture shock, but in a good way. He mentioned seeing French kids his age smoking, getting watered-down wine at dinner, exploring old, actual Nazi bunkers on the coast.
Wow. So way more freedom, a different vibe altogether.
Definitely. It was about opening up his senses, not just to food, but to, everything. He also spent summers in this little oyster village, La Teste de Bouche. More unconventional experiences.
So that's the background. But the first real kitchen, that was a place called the Dreadnought.
Ah, the Dreadnought.
Yeah.
He paints quite a picture. Management. Aged, retiring, and boozy, he calls them. Waitresses. Attractive and cheerful, and maybe a bit too friendly with the kitchen staff.
Okay, so a bit loose.
A bit. But the real power, he says, was with the cooks. These guys were something else.
Tell me about them. Who was in this crew?
Well, there was Bobby, the chef, kind of an ex-hippie, year-round local, did carpentry off-season. Then Lydia, he describes her as a half-mad, matronly Portuguese divorcee, made the chowder, drank quite a bit.
Okay.
Tommy, the fry cook, just a surfer type, always on the move. And Mike on salads, an ex-con, who apparently dealt a bit of methadone on the side.
Seriously, that's quite the team.
Right. And Bourdain looked up to them like they were gods. They had these badass knives, always sharp slinging pans around. They even had their own slang, like pod for partner.
Sounds intense and kind of chaotic.
Oh, it was. But there was this weird code, too. He talks about how they'd basically loot the place systematically, like the chef loading his van with sirloin strips, beer, shrimp, everything for the off-season.
Whoa, so stealing was just part of the deal.
It seems like it, yeah. A kind of survival tactic, maybe. Forged this weird loyalty. The kitchen itself was pretty standard: cold station, steamer, fryers, range, broiler, grill.
And then came his big moment, right?
Yeah, the pivotal moment. Bobby, the chef, just suddenly turns to him, looking shaky, says, "Tony, watch my station," and bolts out the back.
Just like that. Thrown into the fire.
Completely. Left alone, mid-rush. And you'd think that would be terrifying, right?
Perhaps.
But that's when it hit him. He writes right there in that chaos, "I knew then I wanted to be a chef."
Wow. So the intensity, the craziness, that's what hooked him.
Seems like it. It wasn't just about, the pokes he mentions later. Fornication, free booze, and ready access to drugs, though, sure, that was part of the scene.
Right. But it was deeper. He talks about food he genuinely loves, doesn't he? Simple stuff.
Yeah, specifically Portuguese dishes. Squid stew, Wellfleet oysters, which are amazing, by the way, clam chowder, chorizo, kale soup. Real hearty food. But underlying it all is this phrase he uses: food is pain.
Food is pain. What do you think he means by that? Sounds harsh?
I think it's about the grind, the sheer physical effort, the burns, the cuts, the pressure, the long hours. It's not just pretty plates, it's sacrifice. It costs something, physically and mentally, to produce great food consistently.
That makes sense. It's not just passion, it's endurance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And even formal training had its own kind of pain. He went to the Culinary Institute of America, the CIA.
Right, the famous one.
And he talks about this one instructor, Chef Banya, Italian-Swiss, German accent. Bourdain calls him a bully, a bit of a sadist, and a showman.
Doesn't sound like a great teacher.
Well, yes and no. He says Banya knew his stuff, especially vegetables. And crucially, he knew how to apply pressure, taught them how to handle it. So even the difficult figures taught valuable lessons.
Interesting. And his own heroes back then weren't exactly chefs, were they?
No. He lists Hunter S. Thompson, William Burroughs, Iggy Pop, Bruce Lee. He saw himself as this hyper-violent, junkie Byron, very romantic, rebellious image.
Definitely not your typical culinary student. And he had strong opinions even then, like about pastry.
Oh, yeah. He hated overly fuzzy pastry work. So when chefs think they're artists, not craftsmen, it goes wrong. He mentioned seeing some terrible Nixon cake as proof it's all about substance for him, not just looking fancy.
That tracks. And that attitude extends to diners, too. He's famously not a fan of vegetarians.
Huh. Yeah, that's putting mildly. He calls them a persistent irritant and basically the enemy because for him, a life without things like veal stock or pork fat is just unthinkable. Provocative, for sure.
Definitely gets your attention. But he does offer some practical tips for us, the diners, right? Things he learned from inside.
Absolutely. Like, be careful ordering really unusual stuff in quiet restaurants. The ingredients might not be fresh due to slow turnover. Makes sense.
Like, it's a good tip.
And here's a classic New York one from the book. Tuesdays and Thursdays are usually the best nights for fish. Why? Fresh deliveries often come in, and the chef's usually rested after the weekend madness.
Ah, never thought about the chef's schedule affecting my fish order.
Right. And maybe the most important one. Treat your waiter well. Be polite.
Yeah.
He says a waiter could save your life with a raised eyebrow or a sigh.
Meaning they know what's good, what's maybe not so good that night.
Exactly. They're your connection, your intel. Worth keeping them on your side.
Okay, switching gears a bit. Tools, knives. He has opinions there, too.
Of course. He mentions that pros often ditch the heavy German knives like Wusthoffs for lighter Japanese ones like Globals. Easier to sharpen, look cool.
Yeah.
But the main point is you don't need a whole block full. One good chef's knife does most jobs.
Keep it simple.
Yeah, essentialism. And that ties into working clean. It's not just about hygiene, he says. Messy station equals messy mind. That's why line cooks hoard side towels, constantly wiping, keeping things orderly.
And that leads to mise en place, the prep work.
Ah, yes. Mise, that's huge for him. It's deeply personal. It's about being ready, being organized before the chaos hits.
He uses some pretty strong language to describe how protective chefs are of it, doesn't he?
He really does. The code is something like, it's ours, we set it up our way, it's like our knives. Then he gets blunt. Don't touch my dick, don't touch my mise en place.
Wow. Okay, so why that intense? What makes that little setup so critical?
I think it's about having one zone of absolute control in an environment that's often pure chaos. Your station, your prepped ingredients, that's your domain. If someone messes with it, they mess with your flow, your ability to function under fire. It's your mental and physical readiness made tangible.
Right, your anchor in the storm. Okay, so let's talk about the business side. He seems pretty cynical about why people open restaurants.
Deeply cynical. He basically says it's often ego, like some retired guy wants to play Humphrey Bogart in Casablanca. Or, his cruder take is they do it for chicks.
Ouch.
And because the motivation is wrong, the places end up being schizophrenic, he says. They have this feel, this unmistakable odor of uncertainty, fear, and approaching death. He really paints a picture of failing restaurants.
And he lived through that, didn't he? He had that phase where he was the bad guy.
Yeah, his hatchet man phase, working for this big Italian place, 3 kitchens. And his main job, it felt like, was firing people. He says he'd wake up knowing he had to fire someone again. It made him miserable, gave him a terrible reputation, a necessary evil in failing places maybe, but brutal.
Sounds awful. But then he meets this character, Bigfoot.
Bigfoot, yeah, West Village legend. This guy had a different philosophy. He cared way more about someone's character than their resume. He actually preferred if someone said, I don't know, instead of bluffing.
Honesty over fake expertise.
Exactly. And punctuality was non-negotiable. 15 minutes before your shift. Not on the dot, not 1 minute late.
Strict.
Incredibly.
Yeah.
There's a story about him sending back huge deliveries, stuff he desperately needed if the truck was even 5 minutes late. Just on principle. And Bourdain admits he started doing the same thing later. It's about setting insane standards.
Demanding respect for the process, I guess. So after that, he lands at the Supper Club. Sounds like a step up.
In scale, yeah. Huge place. But absolutely bonkers. He describes cooks working without dupes the order tickets.
How do they even know what to cook?
They relied on the expediter shouting orders. This Italian guy whose calls were apparently impossible to understand, just pure chaos. And the after-hours scene.
Oh.
Drinking expensive champagne, doing coke off the bar, people hooking up in the storeroom.
Wild.
Totally. The manager's office, Jimmy's office, was supposedly the hub for shady deals, furnished with stolen hotel stuff. It was that kind of place.
And Bourdain becomes chef there, inheriting someone's setup.
Yeah, he takes over for this guy, Steven, who ran an invisible empire within the kitchen.
Yeah.
And Steven's a whole other story.
Right, yeah, so.
He's this total paradox. Apparently a really thoughtful cook, brings in food for the staff, flirts, jokes around. Everyone likes him.
Okay.
But he's also wildly exhibitionistic. Bourdain mentions him showing up with bodily fluids on his shoes and graphically discussing his bodily functions. Just completely inappropriate by normal standards.
Wow, that's a lot. How do people handle that?
That's a fascinating thing. Bourdain says everyone still liked him, confided in him. It speaks volumes about the weird, intense bonds that form in that pressure cooker. Shared experience trumps conventional social rules, maybe.
It must. Which kind of leads into the whole language of the kitchen, right? Cook talk.
Yes, cook talk. He calls it the real international language.
Yep.
Basically, a nonstop, highly offensive game of insults, the dozens, across multiple languages.
What are the rules of this?
Apparently pretty rigid.
Yeah.
He says the insults have to be about things like sexual humiliation, physical flaws, penis size, annoying habits. Nothing's off limits.
Sure may.
Not exactly. He gives examples. Fuck, and just use like a comma. Suck my dick means hold on. And a really graphic threat basically just means get your prep done.
So it's like a code, but incredibly crude.
Exactly. And his point is, if you're easily offended, you won't survive. But the flip side is, within that environment, things like your gender, your race, your background, totally irrelevant. Right. All that matters is, can you do the job? It's a harsh meritocracy.
It sounds like it strips everything else away, just performance under pressure.
Pretty much. When you're slammed shoulder to shoulder, sweating, getting yelled at, social niceties just evaporate. It's about survival and trusting the person next to you. Creates this strange, intense equality.
Okay, so moving on in his career, he works for Pinot Luongo. Sounds like another intense figure.
Yeah, Pinot Luongo, Coco Pazzo, La Madre, those places. Bourdain calls him New York's Prince of Restaurant Darkness. Working for him was intense, educational, but totally draining.
Why the darkness label?
Pinot built this empire, hugely successful, but the atmosphere was apparently super paranoid. Constant fear, gossip, backstabbing. Bourdain says Pinot's key interview question for him was, Anthony, do you have any enemies?
Wow, not asking about his sauces then.
Nope. It was about navigating the politics, the loyalty, the whole Game of Thrones aspect of high-end restaurants. Opening a new place for Pinot was insane. Pressure critics camped outside, celebs wandering in constantly.
Sounds stressful.
Hugely. He even mentions the ultimate betrayal. A friend, a good cook, gets fired and then comes back literally begging for his job. Shows how the pressure just crushes people in relationships.
Man. So this period sounds like it really took a toll on Bourdain personally.
It definitely did. He describes feeling like the Flying Dutchman, just adrift, no future. The old coping mechanisms, the drugs, the booze, they weren't working anymore. He wasn't escaping the disappointment.
That sounds like a dark place.
Yeah. He mentions hearing this statistic in a cab, something like only 1 in 4 addicts successfully detoxes. Really sobering. It hit him hard.
Did that change how he approached things?
It seems so. He started deliberately tanking job interviews for places he sensed were bad news. Like, he mentions one interview for a restaurant associated with Marla Maples, where a feng shui consultant was involved.
A feng shui consultant in a kitchen interview.
Right. Total red flag for him. He saw it as a sign of misplaced priorities, probably ego-driven, doomed. He started trusting his gut more about which situations were just wrong. He knew the signs of his sinking ship by then.
So he's learning to pick his battles, finally. But he still needed work. He talks about this steakhouse interview.
Yeah, the cattle call.
Yeah.
He describes the waiting room full of chefs who just looked broken and defeated. Depressing scene.
How did he approach it? Did he play it straight?
He played the game strategically. Threw around buzzwords, food cost percent, bang for the buck. Presented himself as the serious, experienced, reasonable chef. Showed he understood the business side.
Smart.
And then the owner asks the big question about art on the plate. How important is presentation?
And what did Bourdain say, knowing his views?
His answer was blunt, next to nothing. He doubled down, saying he cared about good food, honestly prepared, not silly garnishes. It was defiant, but honest. And he got the job.
Ha! So honesty worked eventually, and his journey even took him to Tokyo.
Yeah, to help open a branch of Les Hall, the brasserie he worked at. He was anxious about flying, needed Valium, the whole deal. But Tokyo blew him away.
Especially the fish market, right?
Oh, Tsukiji Market. He said it puts New York's Fulton Street Market to shame. Just the scale, the quality, the energy clearly made a huge impression.
What else stood out to him there?
The culture clash was fascinating. He loved seeing these normally reserved Japanese businessmen, salarymen, just joyfully tearing into huge steaks at Les Hall, this gleeful social disobedience, he called it.
Breaking the mold.
Exactly. And he found his way around, despite apparently committing the ultimate Tokyo faux pas, getting drunk and eating sushi standing up somewhere. He adapted, explored, soaked it in.
So after all these experiences, the highs, the lows, the chaos, he tries to boil down some advice, doesn't he? Like a commencement address for cooks.
Yeah, he lays out 3 core rules for survival, for success, really.
What are they?
First, love what you do. Simple, but crucial. He says it's just too damn hard, otherwise you have to have the passion or you'll burn out.
Makes sense. Number 2.
Know your coworkers, and not just their names. Learn their language, eat the food they bring from home, show respect. It builds trust, builds the team. It's personal and professional.
Okay. And the third one?
Third, don't steal. He says don't do anything you couldn't pass a polygraph test over. No skimming, no freebies, no drugs on the job. Integrity.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because thinking back to the Dreadnought, stealing was practically part of the culture there. He participated.
Right, that's what makes it such a powerful point about his own evolution.
How do you reconcile that? From looting the kitchen to don't steal as a core principle?
I think it shows his journey from just surviving in a chaotic, almost lawless environment to understanding what it takes to be a professional, to build a real, sustainable career and lead others. At Dreadnought, it was maybe necessary or seemed it in that specific context. But later, he realized that trust and integrity are the foundation. You can't build respect, you can't run a serious kitchen if that's compromised. It's the shift from young, desperate cook to responsible chef.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about maturity, responsibility. So looking back at everything he shares, the grit, the language, the drugs, the pressure, it's a tough picture.
It really is unflinching.
But then he ends on this surprisingly sentimental note, doesn't he?
He does. It's quite striking. After all the cynicism and darkness, he talks about asking another respected chef, Scott Bryan, what his ultimate comfort food is. And Bryan says, beef bourguignon.
A classic French stew.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Bourdain has this realization, all cooks are sentimental fools.
Sentimental fools, after everything he's described.
Yeah. It suggests that underneath all the toughness, the profanity, the battle scars, there's this deep, maybe even hidden love for the food itself, for the craft, for the history, for the simple act of feeding people something comforting and delicious. That fundamental passion is maybe what fuels them through all the pain.
Huh. So the hard shell protects the soft core, maybe. It makes you think, doesn't it? About the contrast between the demanding reality of a profession and the hidden heart that keeps people dedicated to it. What drives the people behind the tough jobs in our lives?